Good morning, friends. Today's talk is concerning the twin doctrines of karma and reincarnation. As a lead-in to this topic, this student shall begin with a brief summary of some of fundamental theosophical teachings. First, there is one absolute, eternal, immutable, and unlimited reality, which is the source of all manifestation. The one reality is represented by absolute abstract motion and absolute abstract space, which is made up of or contains invisible divine substance. On the pre-cosmic astral plane, divine substance remains ethereal and eternally homogeneous. However, it becomes increasingly substantial and heterogeneous on the plane of manifestation and form. Divine substance is the underlying substance of all matter, and it underlies all visible or objective planes of nature. Through a process of condensation, divine substance differentiates into 7 planes of manifestation, of increasing densification, from the most ethereal to the most gross. All modes of activity on the manifested planes of being are internally guided by a myriad of spiritual hierarchies, each with its exact function and precise scope of action. Corresponding with the 7 cosmic planes of manifestation is the sevenfold constitution of man. It is held that man is truly a microcosm or a miniature copy of the macrocosm. As such, man is divine in essence, being a direct radiation from pre-cosmic divine substance, and is predestined to make the obligatory pilgrimage through the cycle of successive incarnations in accordance with cyclic and karmic law. There are 7 principles of the inner constitution of man. 3 of the 7 principles of the inner constitution of man, taken together, are considered to be the real immortal entity that actually makes the obligatory pilgrimage through the cycle of successive incarnations or rebirths. They are Atma, universal spirit. Buddhi is the luminous spiritual soul, and Manas, mind or intelligence. The lower 4 principles are transitory and perishable. They are Kama, blind desire and passions; Prana, the life force or current on the physical plane of existence; the astral body, the paradigm or model of the physical body; and the physical body. The lower 4 form and come into existence at the time of incarnation and dissolve into their component parts on their corresponding plane at the time of death. Meanwhile, at the time of death, the threefold soul entity, Atma, Buddhi, Manas, withdraws from the physical plane and awaits the next incarnation. Over the entire course of the cycle of rebirths, in the various periods of incarnations, the individual is in conflict with his higher and lower self. Depending upon the stage of spiritual evolution, the individual may or may not be aware of this inherent struggle. Ultimately, it is an ethical conflict of choice between right and wrong, thoughts and actions. Pursuant to karmic law, right thoughts and right actions are those which preserve moral harmony and nature's equilibrium, while wrong thoughts and wrong actions cause moral chaos or disturbance or imbalance in nature's equilibrium. The karmic effect of these choices for the individual in its present life or subsequent lives is relative fortune or relative suffering. Some think reward and punishment. The individual's inherent conflict between right and wrong is centered in the field of the fourth principle of man's sevenfold constitution: desire and passions. This principle, like the fifth principle, manas, has a higher and lower aspect. Behind every action there is thought, and behind every thought there is desire. Hence, desire is the basis of action, or the motivator of the will to act. Thus, right desire leads to right action. Whether the individual is motivated to express the higher or lower aspects of its desires and passion is dependent upon the level of its consciousness. The focus of its awareness on the lower self through, for example, selfish desires and actions causes the individual to repeatedly incur karmic debt, which must be settled in accordance with karmic law during the course of the cycle of rebirth, reincarnations. Whereas the individual consciousness focused on the higher self through, for example, altruism and benevolence, charity and forgiveness, raises the individual up closer to the closer to blissfulness and human perfection. Now, what is karma? We only know what we know about karma from observation and intellect, and from what others have said about it, including HPB and other theosophists. Karma is the perpetual motion of the absolute abstract reality spoken of earlier. Karma has a dual character: cause and effect, spirit and matter. Karma is the law of cause and effect in action. Karma does not act. Karma is action. Karma is not just. Karma is justice. Karma is exhaustless in nature. Now, let's see what William Q. Judge has to say about karma in the aphorisms on karma. First one: there is no karma unless there's a being to make it or feel its effects. Karma is the adjustment of effects flowing from causes, during which the being upon whom and through whom that adjustment is affected experiences pain or pleasure. Karma is an undeviating and unerring tendency in the universe to restore equilibrium, and it operates incessantly. The apparent stoppage of this restoration to equilibrium is due to the necessary adjustment of disturbance at some other spot, place, or focus, which is visible only to the yogi, to the sage, or the perfect seer. There is therefore no stoppage, but only a hiding from view. Karma operates on all things and beings, from the minutest conceivable atom up to Brahma. Proceeding in the three worlds of men, gods, and the elemental beings, no spot in the manifested universe is exempt from its sway. Karma is not subject to time. For all other men, karma is in its essential nature unknown and unknowable. but its action may be known by calculation from cause to effect. And this calculation is possible because the effect is wrapped up in and not succeedent to the cause. Karma causes already set in motion must be allowed to sweep on until exhausted. But this permits no man to refuse help to his fellows and every sentient being. The effects may be counteracted or mitigated by the thoughts and actions of oneself or of another, and then the resulting effects represent the combination and interaction of the whole number of causes involved in producing the effects. In the life of worlds, races, nations, and individuals, karma cannot act unless there is an appropriate instrument provided for its actions. And until such appropriate instrument is found, that karma is related to it remains unexpended. Karma may be of three sorts: presently operative in this life through the appropriate instruments, that which is being made or stored up to be exhausted in the future, karma held over from past lives or lives and not operating, yet because inhibited by inappropriateness of the instrument in use by the ego or by the force of karma now operating. The three fields of operation are used in each being by karma: the body and the circumstances, the mind and intellect, the psychic and astral planes. Measures taken by an ego to repress tendency, eliminate defects, and to counteract by setting up different causes will alter the sway of karmic tendency and shorten its influence in accordance with the strength or weakness of the efforts expended in carrying out the measures adopted. No man but a sage or true seer can judge another's karma. Hence, while each receives his deserts, appearances may deceive, and birth into poverty or heavy trial may not be punishment for bad karma. For egos continually incarnate into poor surroundings where they experience difficulties and trials which are for their discipline of the ego and result in strength, fortitude, and sympathy. Now, I'd like to turn to the question of what can be done, if anything, to influence your karma. And in order to answer those questions, I'd like to turn to a story that I found, and the story of Jamila. Some of you may be familiar with this. The story of Jamila is briefly as follows, and this is, I'm reading. He was a man who married a woman of evil ways and became very dishonest and an easy prey to wicked and sinful habits. Of his 10 sons, his favorite was the youngest, named Narayana. One day, when Jamila thought he was dying, he was terror-stricken by the sight of 3 ugly demon-like attendants of the king of death. He called his son Narayana, but as he uttered the name, his mind became wholly concentrated on Narayana, or Vishnu, the Lord of Love. While he was thus intently meditating upon God, there appeared before him the attendants of Lord Vishnu, who confronted the attendants of death. The latter asked the former why they were preventing the law from taking its course. As a man sows, so must he reap, they said. Man is subject to 3 gunas, and his present life shows plainly his past as well as his future. His deeds leave their impressions on his subtle body, and these impressions control his actions, and his future life is determined by all his present deeds. Ajamila was in his early youth. The attendance of death reminded the attendance of Vishnu, a devout and truthful man, self-controlled, well-versed in the scriptures, a friend to all beings and creatures. But one day, while in the woods, gathering flowers for worship, he was aroused by the sight of a lustful couple, lost all control of himself, became greatly attached to the woman who was a wanton, forsook his lawful wife for her, and gave up the pure life that he had been living. He wasted his entire fortune trying to please this woman and began to employ dishonest means to earn his living. He was now about to die in all his sins, to be taken to the king of death, who would punish him justly, and the suffering he would undergo could purify him. The attendants of Vishnu replied that Ajamila had expiated all his sins by uttering the name of God and surrendering himself to the Lord. Wrongdoing is not eradicated or expiated, they said, if the mind continues to follow wicked desires. But when the name of God and the love of God have purified the heart, all sins are completely destroyed. The mere name of God has power to save even the most depraved. On hearing all this, the attendants of death went away, and Ajamila regained his consciousness and gradually got back his health. He felt that he had received a great blessing, perhaps owing to a few good deeds stored up from his past, and his whole life seemed to be transformed. He gave up his evil ways, renounced his home, practiced yoga for many years, attained self-control, and his mind became firmly fixed in the contemplation of the divine self. When death finally came to him, he gave up his body while chanting the sacred name of God and absorbed in meditation, thus freeing himself from the bondage of karma. In the preamble of this story, we're told that if a man commits sinful acts, which he does not expiate in his life, he must pay the penalty in the next life, and his suffering will be great. Expiation and repentance are of no avail to a man who continues to commit sinful acts, knowing them to be harmful. All sinful thoughts and evil deeds are caused by ignorance, and true expiation comes from illumination. The fire of spiritual knowledge consumes all evil and ignorance and contemplates transformation of the inner life, and complete transformation of the inner life is accomplished by following and living the truth and through the development of the love of God. Even the most sinful man is purified if he surrenders himself to God, to the God of love, and with whole soul devotion serves his devotees. The path of love is the simplest way by which to free ourselves from sin. Death is conquered, and the fear of death is overcome by meditation upon Krishna, the God of love. This message and the illustrative story of Ajamila seems to imply that a man can, by intense and sudden repentance, earn for himself the right to expiate his sins through prolonged meditation and devotion in his life, even freeing himself from the bonds of karma. It would also seem that such a view is contradictory to the doctrine of exact and inexorable karmic retribution. What is the teaching of theosophy on the subject? William Q. Judge explained that karma is a doctrine too vast and complicated to be disposed of by set rules applied like balance sheets to commercial enterprises. But one thing is certain: karma is action, viewed from every side and on each occasion. In his article entitled, "Is Karma Only Punishment?" he points out that one branch of the law of karma deals with the vicissitudes of life, with the differing states of men, with rewards and punishments. Each state is the exact result bound to come from acts that disturb or preserve the harmony of nature. Karmic rewards work both on the material plane and on the inner character, on the circumstances and on the tendencies of the person placed in a particular environment. We are continually fitting our arrows to the bow and shooting them forth, but it's not the arrow or the bow that counts. The important thing is the motive and the thought with which the missile is shot. Again, in his article on environment, Mr. Judge explains that the real environment to be understood and cared about is that in which karma itself inheres in us. It is only because we see but an infinitesimal part of the long series of karmic precipitations that any apparent confusion or difficulty arises. When a man gives up the indecision of ignorance, even one definite and knowing step on the good or evil path produces great karmic results. To quote, "He who would escape from the bondage of karma must raise his individuality out of the shadow into the shine, must so elevate his existence to these threads, do not come in contact with soiling substance, do not become so attached as to be pulled awry. He simply lifts himself out of the region in which karma operates." This is precisely what Ajamila did. He learned that there was no cure for desire, for the fear of death or the thought of reward and punishment, save in the fixing of the sight and hearing upon that which is invisible and soundless. He freed himself from the bonds of karma, only by fixing his whole attention on that which is unaffected by karma. If Ajamila was able to invoke the name and the love of God on the approach of death, this must have been because he did not allow his misdeeds to corrupt his inner consciousness or to destroy the line of his ideation in his early life and in previous lives. Ajamila's repentance may seem to us to be sudden or even easy, but this is precisely where we are mistaken. It is only a highly evolved soul who can refrain from rationalization, even when he falls into a nightmare of wrongdoing, who can bring total intensity to his thought of his higher self and the God of love. It is because we are not in a position to know the entire karmic sequence in the lives of Ajamila. It is because we do not see that part of his karma was working through his finer tendencies developed over a long period that we look upon his dramatic conversion as an easy way of expiation or a setting aside of the law of karma. And I would like to end with a reading from, again, Mr. Judge's aphorisms on karma, where he says, "No man but a sage or true seer can judge another's karma. Hence, while each receives his deserts, appearances may deceive, and birth into poverty or heavy trial may not be punishment for bad karma, for egos continually incarnate into poor surroundings while they experience difficulties and trials which are for the discipline of the ego and result in strength, fortitude, and sympathy." And I think I'll stop there.